People say a foundation is concrete and steel, but they are wrong. It is trust. I spent 40 years investigating structural failures, tracking down loose screws and corroded beams. Yet, my hardest case began with a crumpled note slipped into my hand by my trembling grandson. What I found inside Storage Unit 247 was not simple adultery. It was the blueprint for a perfect collapse, and the intended victim was my own son. My name is Arthur Vance, and for 40 years, I made a living listening to buildings scream. Concrete does not fail in silence. Steel does not buckle without a groan. Before a collapse, before the dust clouds and the sirens, there is always a sound, a vibration, a warning that the structural integrity has been compromised. I retired 2 years ago, hanging up my hard hat and my laser measures. But you never really stop listening for the cracks. That Tuesday night, driving through a blinding Chicago snowstorm toward the suburb of Evanston, the only thing I could hear was the rhythmic slap of my windshield wipers. But my gut was already tightening with that familiar, pre-disaster tension. I was heading to my son Lucas's house. Lucas is 44 years old, the chief architect at OmniBuild Solutions, and a man who used to have a mind like a steel trap. He designed structures that defied gravity, soaring glass towers that laughed at the wind. But lately, when I looked at my son, I did not see a skyscraper. I saw a condemned building waiting for the wrecking ball. The house itself was a masterpiece of modern architecture, all sharp angles, floor-to-ceiling glass, and dark slate. It sat on the lot like a fortress, beautiful, but utterly devoid of warmth. As I pulled my truck into the driveway, the motion sensor lights flooded the snow-covered lawn with a harsh, clinical white glare. I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, watching the snow pile up on the hood. I did not want to go inside. That was the first warning sign. I had visited crime scenes and collapse sites with more enthusiasm than I had for visiting my own son's home. When Lucas opened the door, the heat from the foyer hit me, but it was the sight of him that made me shiver. He looked like a load-bearing wall that had been stripped of its rebar. His skin was the color of old parchment gray and translucent, stretching too tightly over his cheekbones. He had lost 20 pounds since Christmas. "Hey, Dad," he said. His voice was thin, reedy. "Hello, Lucas." I stepped inside, stomping the snow off my boots. I reached out to clap him on the shoulder, a solid, reassuring gesture, but I stopped myself. He looked too fragile, as if a firm touch might shatter him. Instead, I handed him the bottle of wine I had brought. "Thanks," he muttered. He took the bottle and I watched his hand. It was trembling. A fine, high-frequency tremor that rattled the wine inside the glass neck. His pupils were dilated, swallowing the iris despite the bright LED lights of the hallway. In my line of work, we call this material fatigue. In humans, it is a sign that the central nervous system is firing on all cylinders, screaming at a threat the conscious mind cannot yet see. "Lucas, honey, is that your father?" The voice drifted down from the spiral staircase, smooth as velvet and cold as liquid nitrogen. Isabella descended the stairs, my son's wife. She was 34, 10 years younger than Lucas, and possessed the kind of beauty that felt manufactured in a laboratory. Her hair was a perfect cascade of blonde, her dress a tailored silk sheath that cost more than my first car. She moved with a fluid, predatory grace. She reached the bottom of the stairs and wrapped an arm around Lucas's waist. To an outsider, it looked like affection. To me, it looked like a structural brace holding up a sagging beam. "Arthur," she beamed, flashing teeth that were too white, too straight. "It is so good to see you. We were worried you would get stuck in the storm." "I have driven in worse," I said, keeping my face neutral. She looked at Lucas, her smile never wavering, but her eyes, ice blue and flat, did not match the warmth of her mouth. She smoothed the lapel of his jacket. "Lucas, darling, why don't you take your father's coat? You are forgetting your manners." "Right." "Sorry," Lucas mumbled, fumbling for my coat. He moved sluggishly, like he was wading through deep water. We moved into the dining room. The table was set for 4 with crystal glasses and silver cutlery gleaming under the chandelier. And there, sitting at the far end, was the anomaly. Leo, my grandson, 16 years old. He did not look up when I entered. He was hunched over his plate, his shoulders drawn up toward his ears in a defensive posture. He was wearing a hooded sweatshirt, the hood pulled up, casting a shadow over his face. "Hey, kiddo," I said, walking over to him. Leo looked up briefly. His eyes were dark ringed with purple shadows of exhaustion, but for a split second, I saw a flash of something sharp. Alertness. Then he dropped his gaze back to the table. "Hey, Grandpa," he whispered. I took my seat across from Lucas. Isabella sat at the head of the table, the commander of the vessel. She rang a small silver bell, and she began to serve the food from a large ceramic tureen. A rich, aromatic beef stew. She ladled a generous portion into Lucas's bowl, then mine, then her own. When she reached for Leo's bowl, the boy moved his hand, covering the porcelain. "I'm good," Leo said. His voice was flat. Isabella sighed, a theatrical sound of long-suffering patience. "Leo, we have discussed this. You need to eat a proper meal." "Not that junk. I'm good," Leo repeated. He reached down into his backpack, which was resting against the leg of his chair. I heard the distinct snap hiss of a pull-tab can opening. He placed a tin of cold ravioli on the table, right on top of the expensive linen placemat. He pulled a plastic fork from his pocket and began to eat the cold pasta straight from the can. The tension in the room spiked instantly. This was a declaration of war, or perhaps a quarantine measure. I watched my grandson eat that processed sludge with grim determination, refusing to touch the bread, the water, or the stew that Isabella had prepared. He was isolating his supply chain. Smart kid. "So, Arthur," Isabella said, ignoring Leo's rebellion and turning her high-beam smile on me. "How is retirement treating you? Still missing the dust and grime?" "It is quiet," I said, taking a sip of water. I brought my own water bottle in from the truck, a habit from years on job sites, and I noticed Leo watching me drink from it with approval. "I keep busy. Woodworking mostly." "Lucas, tell your father about the new project," Isabella prompted, placing a hand on Lucas's forearm. Her fingers were long manicured, the nails painted a deep blood red. Lucas blinked, as if waking from a trance. "Oh, yeah, the Skyline project. It is going well. OmniBuild is counting on him," Isabella added, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "It is a $200 million contract. It is big." Lucas agreed, his speech slightly slurred. "We are doing the load calculations for the atrium. The cantilever span is 50 feet. We are using standard rebar." I frowned. I set my fork down. "Lucas, a 50-foot cantilever with standard rebar. That is impossible. The tensile stress would snap it in half." "You mean post-tensioned cables, right? Or a steel truss system?" Lucas looked confused, his brow furrowed, creating deep trenches in his pale skin. No, I think standard. The concrete. The compressive strength is 2,000 pounds per square inch." My blood ran cold. 2,000 pounds per square inch. That is sidewalk concrete, Lucas. High-rise structural concrete needs to be at least 6,000, maybe 10,000 for the lower columns. You know this. You wrote the manual on this 15 years ago. Lucas opened his mouth, his jaw working, but no words came out. He looked terrified. He looked like a man reaching for a tool that was no longer on his belt. Isabella laughed, a tinkling, brittle sound that grated on my nerves. "Oh, Arthur, stop grilling him. He is exhausted. The merger has him working 18 hours a day. He is just mixing up the numbers. He knows what he is doing." She turned to Lucas, patting his hand. "You meant 10,000, didn't you, honey?" "Yes," Lucas parroted, immediately, relief washing over his face. Yes. 10,000. That is what I meant. I stared at my son. This was not just stress. I have seen stressed engineers. They get cranky, they drink too much coffee, they get ulcers. They do not forget the fundamental properties of concrete. This was cognitive failure. The structural integrity of his mind was failing. Isabella took control of the conversation, then steering it away from work, talking about her charity auctions, her gallery visits, her shopping trips to Milan. She spoke for Lucas, finishing his sentences, correcting his memories. "We went to that lovely Italian place last week, didn't we, Lucas?" she would say. Lucas would nod. "Yes. The lasagna was good." "No, darling, you had the risotto," she would correct him with a smile. "You remember." "I guess I did," he would murmur, shrinking into his chair. I watched this dynamic with growing horror. It was a demolition. She was dismantling his reality brick by brick, and he was too weak to stop her. I looked at Leo. The boy was methodically scraping the bottom of his ravioli can, his eyes darting between his father and his stepmother. He saw it too. He was the only other person in the room who realized the building was on fire. Then came the fracture point. Lucas reached for his wineglass. His hand was shaking so badly that the stem of the glass rattled against the table. He tried to bring it to his lips, but a spasm jerked his wrist. The glass tipped. Red wine, dark and viscous like arterial blood, splashed across the pristine white tablecloth. It soaked into the fabric, spreading toward Isabella's plate. Lucas gasped, dropping the glass. It shattered. "I am sorry," he stammered, pushing his chair back. "I am so sorry. I am so clumsy." Isabella did not move. She stared at the stain. Then slowly, she turned her head to Lucas. The smile remained on her face, fixed and plastic, but her eyes were dead. "It is okay, darling," she said softly. "Accidents happen." She reached out and placed her hand on his shoulder, right near the base of his neck. I saw her thumb dig in. I saw the tendons in her forearm verify the pressure. She was squeezing the trapezius muscle, a pressure point that can bring a grown man to his knees. Lucas flinched, a sharp intake of breath hissing through his teeth. His face contorted in pain, but he did not pull away. He sat there paralyzed, enduring the punishment. "Let me help clean up," Leo said suddenly. The boy jumped up from his seat. In the commotion, he grabbed a stack of napkins and dove under the table to blot the spill on the carpet. Isabella was distracted, her eyes locked on Lucas, enjoying her petty dominance. "Dad, check the carpet," Leo said, his voice coming from under the table. I leaned down, pretending to inspect the damage. Under the tablecloth, in the shadow of the heavy oak furniture, a small, cold hand found mine. Leo pressed a folded piece of paper into my palm. His fingers were trembling violently. He looked at me, then just for a second from the darkness under the table. His eyes were wide, terrified and pleading. He put a finger to his lips. I closed my fist around the paper. I sat up. "It will stain," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline dumping into my system. "But the carpet is salvageable." Isabella finally released her grip on Lucas. She stood up, smoothing her dress. "I will get the stain remover. Lucas, go wash your face. You look a mess." As soon as she left the room, the atmosphere shifted. Lucas sat with his head in his hands. Leo went back to his chair, staring at the empty tin can. I needed to read that note. "Excuse me," I said. "I need to use the restroom." The drive over was long. I walked down the hallway to the guest bathroom. I locked the door. I turned on the faucet, letting the water run to mask the sound of crinkling paper. My own hands were steady, force of habit, but my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I unfolded the note. It was a torn scrap of notebook paper ruled with blue lines. The handwriting was jagged, rushed. "Check storage unit 247. Code is Mom's birthday backwards. You need to see what is inside before Friday." I looked up at him, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. Just stared at his plate while his stepmother, Carolyn, chatted away about her shopping trip. That's when I knew something was terribly, terribly wrong. "Wait." I blinked, my mind correcting the error. The boy's name was Leo. The stepmother was Isabella. The panic was making my memory superimposed with the anxiety of the moment. I focused on the ink on the page in front of me. Grandpa, it read. Check storage unit 247. Dad rented it last month but forgot. Unit 247. The combination is Mom's death day backwards. Do not let her know. Save Dad. I stared at the words. Mom's death day. Not birthday. Death day. A code born from trauma. I flushed the toilet for appearances, tucked the note deep into the inside pocket of my flannel shirt, and washed my hands. I looked at myself in the mirror. Arthur Vance, 68 years old. Gray hair-lined face, eyes that had seen too many structures fail. I looked tired, but beneath the fatigue I felt the old engine turning over. The cold, analytical fury that had driven me through 4 decades of forensic engineering was waking up. I walked back out. I made my excuses. I told them the storm was getting worse and I needed to beat the ice. Isabella walked me to the door. Drive safe, Arthur, she said, leaning in to give me a hug. I held my breath as she embraced me. She smelled of expensive perfume and something chemical, distinct and sharp like ozone or cleaning fluid. Take care of him, I said, pulling away. Always, she purred. I walked out into the biting wind. The snow was falling harder now, erasing the world in white. I got into my truck and locked the doors. I looked back at the house. From the outside, it still looked perfect. The warm light spilled from the windows, promising comfort and safety. But I knew better. I had seen the hairline fractures in the foundation. I had heard the groan of the beams. The Vance family was not just a house divided. It was a structure rigged for demolition. And I was the only one with the blueprints to stop it. I put the truck in gear and drove away, leaving the warmth of the suburbs for the dark, industrial stretch of storage units on the edge of town. The real work was just beginning. The silence in my own home felt different that night. Usually, the quiet of my bungalow in the Rogers Park neighborhood was a comfort, a structural stability I relied on after the chaotic noise of construction sites. But after leaving Lucas's house, the silence felt heavy, like the dead air in a tunnel, just before the supports give way. I sat in my leather armchair in the study, a single lamp casting long, jagged shadows against the bookshelves. I had a stack of old case files on the desk, a bridge collapse in 1998, a parking garage failure in 2005, but I could not focus on the physics of concrete and rebar. My mind was entirely occupied by the deteriorating architecture of my son's life. I could not sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Lucas's trembling hands spilling that wine. I saw the terror in Leo's eyes from the darkness under the table. I got up and poured myself a glass of bourbon, neat not to drink, but to have something to hold, something to ground me. I found myself staring at a framed photograph on the mantel. It was taken 5 years ago. My wife, Martha, was still alive then. She was standing between Lucas and me, holding a newborn puppy. Lucas looked strong then. His smile was genuine, his shoulders squared. He was a load-bearing wall capable of supporting the weight of his career, his son, his life. Martha was the foundation. When cancer took her 3 years ago, the foundation cracked. We all felt the shift. But Lucas crumbled. I sipped the bourbon and let the memory of his grief wash over me. It was raw and ugly. He was vulnerable, a building with its structural steel exposed to the elements. And that was exactly when Isabella appeared. It happened too fast. That is the first rule of engineering. Rapid construction often leads to catastrophic failure. You need time for the concrete to cure. You need time for the soil to settle. Lucas took no time. 5 months after Martha's funeral, he met Isabella at a gallery opening. 2 months later, they were married. I remembered my initial skepticism, which I had pushed down, telling myself I was just a bitter old man who missed his wife. I told myself Lucas deserved to be happy. I told myself she was just the renovation he needed. I was a fool. She was not a renovation. She was a demolition crew disguised as a cleaning service. I set the glass down and opened my laptop. I am not a digital forensic expert, but you do not need to be a hacker to spot a facade. I typed her name into the search bar. Isabella Vance. Isabella Ricci, her maiden name. I spent 3 hours scouring the internet. In this day and age, everyone leaves a footprint. A high school yearbook photo, a mention in a local college newspaper, a forgotten social media profile from 10 years ago. We are a species of data. But Isabella, she was a ghost. Her digital history began exactly 3 years ago. An Instagram account started in 2023. A LinkedIn profile created the same month, listing her as an art consultant with vague freelance experience in Europe. Before that, nothing. It was a digital vacuum. No university records, no marriage license from a previous life, though she wore the weary cynicism of a woman who had been around the block more than once. It was as if she had been manufactured whole 3 years ago specifically to walk into that gallery and find a grieving, wealthy architect. People do not just appear. Identities are built over lifetimes. A lack of history is not privacy. It is concealment. My suspicion turned into a cold, hard knot in my stomach. I remembered the black sedan I had seen parked 2 houses down from Lucas's place earlier that evening. I had noticed it when I pulled in a nondescript model engine off, but the interior light had flickered on for a second. At the time, I thought it was a neighbor. Now my paranoia was connecting dots that were not even on the page yet. I grabbed my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name Miller. Detective Frank Miller. We had worked together on a criminal negligence case involving a corrupt contractor 10 years ago. It was late, past 1 in the morning, but Frank was an insomniac who lived on coffee and cigarettes. I hit dial. He picked up on the 4th ring. Vance. You better be calling to tell me you have a lead on that poker game you owe me. I need a favor, Frank, I said, skipping the pleasantries. My voice sounded gravelly in the quiet room. It is 1 in the morning, Art. I know. I need you to run a plate. There was a pause, the sound of a lighter flicking, then a long exhale. You in trouble? Not me. Maybe my son. I saw a car tonight. It felt off. Illinois plate. I recited the number from memory. My brain still retained sequences of numbers, like it retained stress loads. It was a habit I could never break. Give me 10 minutes, Frank grumbled. But this cost you a bottle of that single malt you hoard. Done. I hung up and sat back, my heart rate steady but heavy. My mind drifted back to the dinner. The image of Leo eating cold ravioli from a can. It had seemed like teenage petulance at the time, a silent protest against his stepmother. But now, viewing it through the lens of the note, the context shifted violently. Leo was not being a brat. He was surviving. In structural forensics, we talk about containment. If a chemical spill occurs in a factory, you seal off the area. You do not use the local water supply. You bring in your own resources. Leo was refusing to eat the food Isabella prepared. He was refusing to drink the water she poured. He was isolating his biological intake. My grandson, at 16 years old, had concluded that his stepmother was poisoning his father, and he had enacted a protocol to ensure he did not become the second victim. The realization made me want to weep and punch the wall at the same time. He was alone in that house, surrounded by invisible toxicity, holding his breath. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Frank. Rental. Hertz at O'Hare. Rented 3 days ago under the name John Doe. Fake ID used, flagged by the system an hour ago. Car was reported seen near a burglary in Naperville yesterday. Watch yourself, Art. A rental with a fake ID parked watching my son's house. This was not a domestic dispute. This was an operation. I did not sleep that night. I showered, dressed in my work clothes, flannel shirt, durable canvas pants, boots, and waited for the sun to rise. I needed to see the damage up close. I needed to see the cracks in the walls. At 8 in the morning, I drove to the Omni Build Solutions headquarters in downtown Chicago. The storm had passed, leaving the city coated in gray slush. The Omnibuild Tower was a gleaming spire of steel and glass, a testament to human engineering. Lucas's office was on the 40th floor. I bypassed the reception, flashing my old visitor badge that I had never returned. I went straight to Lucas's executive suite. His secretary, a sharp woman named Sarah, who had been with him since he made partner, looked up in surprise. Her face was drawn tired. "Mr. Vance," she said, standing up. "Is Lucas okay? He is not answering his phone." "He is under the weather," I lied smoothly. "I came to pick up some files for him. He is worried about the stadium project." Sarah let out a breath that was half sigh, half sob. "Oh, thank God. I have been so worried, Mr. Vance. Honestly, I do not know what is happening." "What do you mean?" I stepped closer to her desk, lowering my voice. She looked around to ensure the other cubicles were empty. He is making mistakes. Big ones. He approved a change order yesterday for the wrong grade of steel on the west truss. If the engineers downstairs had not caught it, the roof would have collapsed under the first snow load. And the spending. "Show me," I commanded. She hesitated, then turned her monitor. She pulled up the digital approval logs. There were transfers of funds, large ones moving from the operational budget to a shell vendor I had never heard of. But what caught my eye was the signature at the bottom of the digital pad. Lucas had a distinctive signature, sharp, angular, precise. The signature on the screen was a mess. The loops were elongated, dragging. The pressure points where the pen hits the screen hardest were all wrong. I leaned in, putting on my reading glasses. I have analyzed forged inspection reports for decades. I know what a fake looks like. But this was not a forgery. This was Lucas's hand, but it was a hand disconnected from the brain. "Look at the tail of the V," I whispered to myself. "It trails off. There is no snap at the end. That is the writing of a man whose motor cortex is being suppressed. It is the writing of a man on heavy sedatives or neuroinhibitors." He did not read this document. He was likely barely conscious when he signed it. "Can I print this?" I asked Sarah. She nodded. "Take it. Please, just help him. He is not himself." I took the printout, folded it, and placed it in my inside pocket, next to Leo's note. As I was walking back to the elevator, my phone rang. The screen flashed Isabella. I stared at it for a full 5 seconds. The predator was checking the perimeter. I took a deep breath, forcing my heart rate to slow, forcing my voice to drop into the register of a confused, harmless old man. "Hello, Arthur." Her voice was bright, chirpy. "I was just calling to check on you. You left so abruptly last night. Did you make it home safe?" I cleared my throat. Yes. Sorry about that, dear. The roads were terrible. I just wanted to get back before the ice set in." "I am so glad. Where are you now?" I can hear background noise. I froze. I was in the lobby of the Omnibuild Tower, the ambient hum of the city, the elevators dinging, the distant chatter of employees. "Oh, I am at the hardware store," I lied, picking up some sandpaper. "I am in the wood shop today, working on that rocking chair." A pause, a beat too long. She was analyzing the audio data. "That is wonderful," she said finally, though the warmth had dropped a degree. "You know Lucas is feeling much worse today. I think he has the flu. We are going to keep him in bed. No visitors for a few days, I am afraid. I do not want you to catch it." She was sealing the site. She was cutting off access. "Of course," I said. "Tell him to rest. I will check in later." I hung up. My hand was sweating against the metal casing of the phone. She knew. Or she suspected. She was isolating the target. If I tried to go back to the house now, she would play the concerned wife, maybe even call the police if I forced my way in. I needed something stronger than suspicion. I needed the wrecking ball. I walked out of the building and into the cold Chicago wind. I looked at the time. It was 10 in the morning. Leo's note said Friday. Today was Wednesday. I had 48 hours before whatever deadline she had set. I got into my truck. I did not go to the hardware store. I did not go home. I drove to a diner on the outskirts of the city, ordered a black coffee, and waited for darkness. I could not risk going to the storage unit in broad daylight. If she had a rental car watching my house, she might have eyes on the unit too. I sat there for hours watching the gray sky turn to black. I felt like I was back on a site investigation waiting for the laser scans to finish, knowing that the data was going to confirm my worst fears. The structure was failing. The collapse was imminent. At 7 in the evening, under the cover of a moonless sky, I paid my tab and walked out. I drove toward the industrial district, toward storage unit 247. It was time to see the blueprints of my son's destruction. The wind out here on the edge of the industrial district was not just cold. It was aggressive. It howled through the corrugated metal corridors of the storage facility, rattling the orange roll-up doors, like a prisoner shaking the bars of a cell. The sound was high and thin, a mechanical shriek that set my teeth on edge. I pulled my collar up, checking the number on the unit again. 247. It was located at the end of a long, unlit row, buried in the deepest shadow of the complex. I stood before the keypad. My hand hovered over the buttons. The code. Mom's death day backwards. Martha died on October 4th, 2023. 10/04/23. I reversed it in my mind. 324001. My finger punched the rubber keys. Each beep sounded like a gunshot in the silence. The mechanism clicked, a heavy metallic thud of a deadbolt sliding back. I grabbed the handle near the bottom of the door and heaved. The door rolled up on dry, rusted tracks, screeching in protest. I expected the smell of dust. I expected the musty odor of old cardboard mothballs and forgotten holiday decorations. That is the scent of memory. Instead, I was hit by a wall of air that smelled sharp, acidic, and terrifyingly sterile. It was the smell of a chemistry lab, mixed with the damp rot of a basement. It was the smell of formaldehyde and bleach. I fumbled for the light switch on the wall. A single overhead fluorescent strip flickered to life, buzzing angrily, casting a sickly green pallor over the room. I gasped. The sound was involuntary, ripped from my throat. This was not a storage unit. This was an operations center. The space was pristine. No piles of old clothes, no boxes of books. The concrete floor had been swept clean. Along the left wall stood a long metal workbench, organized with a precision that made my engineer's brain short-circuit. But it was the center of the room that froze the blood in my veins. On a large drafting table sat a massive, intricate architectural model, a diorama. I walked toward it, my boots echoing on the concrete. It was a perfect quarter-inch scale replica of Lucas's house. Every detail was there, from the slate roof to the expansive glass windows. But as I leaned closer, I saw the modifications. The model was covered in small red adhesive arrows. They pointed to specific structural elements of the house. One arrow pointed to the grand spiral staircase in the foyer. Next to it, a tiny handwritten label read, "Loose baluster, third from top. Trip hazard." Another arrow pointed to the master bathroom. "Ventilation blocked. CO buildup potential." A third arrow pointed to the garage, brake line access. My hands started to shake. I looked to the right. There was a second model, smaller, less detailed but unmistakable. It was my house. There was a red arrow pointing to my basement workshop. The label read, "Table saw safety bypass." I stumbled back, gripping the edge of the workbench to steady myself. This was not just a plan. This was a structural analysis of our lives, identifying the load-bearing points where a single calculated strike could bring the whole edifice down. She had engineered our deaths. She had treated our homes not as sanctuaries, but as machines to be sabotaged. I turned away from the models, my stomach churning bile. I looked at the back wall. It was covered in corkboards. Photographs. Dozens of them. There was Lucas taken from a distance with a telephoto lens. Lucas walking into his office. Lucas eating alone at a park bench. Lucas looking pale and sick in his own garden. But next to Lucas were 3 other men. I did not recognize them. One was an older gentleman with silver hair smiling on a golf course. One was a middle-aged man in a suit looking confident. One was younger, maybe 30, laughing at a bar. Across the face of the golfer, a thick red X had been drawn in marker. Across the suit, a red X. Across the younger man, a red X. And over Lucas's face, a question mark. I moved to the workbench. My training kicked in. Document everything. Do not touch with bare hands. I pulled a pair of latex gloves from my pocket. I always kept a pair in my jacket for site inspections, and snapped them on. There was a black leather-bound notebook sitting next to a row of amber glass vials. I opened it. The handwriting was elegant, looped, and feminine. It was the same handwriting I had seen on birthday cards signed with love. Subject for Lucas. I read the entry dated 2 months ago, November 12th. Dosage initiated. 5 milligrams digoxin introduced via morning coffee. Subject complained of heart palpitations by noon. Perfect response. He believes it is stress. The doctor is an idiot, just as I anticipated. I flipped the page. December 2nd. Increased dosage to 10 milligrams. Subject is experiencing visual disturbances. He told me the walls were breathing. I told him the walls were fine, and asked if he had been drinking again. His confusion is delicious. He trusts me completely. He thinks he is losing his mind. Gaslighting protocol is 90% effective. I felt like I was reading the logbook of a demolition expert, noting the placement of charges. Subject. She did not even call him by his name. To her, my son was just a condemned building waiting to be imploded. I looked at the vials lined up on the rack. I recognized the labels from my work in industrial safety, and the sight of them made my knees weak. Hydrochloric acid, used for etching concrete but also for dissolving organic matter. Acetone. And then a small, unmarked bottle filled with a clear, colorless liquid. I picked it up carefully. Taped to the back was a small chemical warning sticker, thallium sulfate. I knew what thallium was. In the old days, they used it as rat poison. It is odorless, tasteless, and dissolves in water. It causes hair loss, nerve damage, muscle weakness, and eventually respiratory failure. It mimics a dozen other natural illnesses. It is the assassin's poison of choice. She was not just drugging him to confuse him. She was actively eroding his biology. She was dissolving him from the inside out, just like acid on limestone. I put the bottle down, terrified I might drop it. My breathing was coming in short, shallow gasps. I needed to get out of here. I needed to burn this place to the ground. But I knew I could not. I needed evidence. I reached for a thick manila envelope at the end of the bench. It was labeled The Widow Project. I opened it. Inside were death certificates. 3 of them. Name Robert Halloway. Age 62. Cause of death accidental fall downstairs. Date 2018. Name Michael Vance, no relation to us. Age 45. Cause of death carbon monoxide poisoning. Defective heater. Date 2020. Name Julian Thorne. Age 31. Cause of death cerebral hemorrhage. Date 2022. I looked up at the photos on the wall. The golfer, the suit, the young man, Robert, Michael, Julian. She had done this before. 3 times. 3 husbands. 3 accidents. She was a black widow spider, spinning a web of structural failures. She married them, she insured them, and then she engineered a catastrophe. But why was Lucas still alive? If she wanted him dead, he would be dead by now. Thallium works slow, but not this slow. I found the answer in a cardboard box on the floor. It was filled with legal documents. I pulled out a stack of papers clipped together. Power of attorney, durable, medical, and financial. It was drafted by a law firm I did not recognize. It granted Isabella full, unrestricted control over Lucas's assets, his medical decisions, and his voting rights at OmniBuild Solutions in the event of his incapacitation. Next to it was a transfer deed for the OmniBuild shares. And at the bottom of the page, there was a signature line for Lucas. It was blank. But next to the blank document there were practice sheets. Dozens of them. Sheets where someone had traced Lucas's signature over and over again, trying to perfect the slant, the loop of the L. But they were not quite right. They lacked the natural flow. Then I saw the date on the power of attorney draft. It was dated for this coming Friday. The realization hit me with the force of a wrecking ball. She did not just want the life insurance. That was small change. She wanted the company. She wanted OmniBuild. But to get it, she needed Lucas alive, but mentally incompetent. She needed him to sign over power, while he was drugged out of his mind, declared unfit by a doctor, and then, once the ink was dry, then came the suicide, or the heart attack. The red arrow on the model pointing to the master bathroom ventilation. CO buildup. She was going to gas him. She was going to make it look like he passed out from the drugs and the furnace malfunctioned. A tragic accident for a grieving, drug-addicted architect. I pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped it. I started taking pictures. I photographed the diary entries. I photographed the vials of thallium. I photographed the death certificates of the 3 dead husbands. I photographed the diorama with its red arrows of death. Flash, flash, flash. Each burst of light felt like it was illuminating the depths of human evil. I had spent my life studying how gravity and physics destroy things. But gravity is innocent. Gravity is just a force. This was malice. This was a human soul that had rotted away completely, leaving only a hunger for money and power. I was snapping a photo of the power of attorney document when I heard a sound. It was faint, coming from outside. The gravel crunching, crunch, crunch. Tires rolling slowly. I froze. I killed the light on my phone. The storage unit had no windows, but there was a small gap at the bottom of the roll-up door. I dropped to my knees and pressed my cheek against the cold concrete floor. Shadows. Headlights swept across the row of units opposite mine, slicing through the gap. A car was moving slowly down the aisle. It stopped. I held my breath. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would give me away. A car door opened, then another. I heard voices, low, muffled. Sure, this is the right row. A man's voice, deep, rough. GPS, says Unit 247, check it. A woman's voice, Isabella. Panic cold and sharp pierced my chest. She was here. How had I tripped a silent alarm? Was there a motion sensor I missed? I scrambled to my feet looking for a weapon. A hammer, a wrench, anything. My eyes darted to the workbench. I saw a heavy pipe wrench. I grabbed it. The cold steel felt heavy in my hand. It was a tool for building, but tonight, it might have to be a tool for breaking. I stood in the center of the room, surrounded by the evidence of my son's murder, listening to the footsteps approaching the door. The handle rattled. Locked. The man grunted. "Open it," Isabella commanded. "I need the supply for Friday. And I need to burn that diary. I have a bad feeling. She was destroying the evidence. Tonight." I looked around frantically. There was no back exit. No vent large enough to crawl through. I was trapped in a steel box with a woman who had killed 3 men and a hired thug who was about to cut the lock. I gripped the wrench. I moved into the shadows behind the door. I was 68 years old. My joints ached. My speed was gone. But I knew about leverage. I knew about strike points. And I knew that I was the only load-bearing wall, standing between my son and his grave. The sound of bolt cutters biting into metal echoed through the unit. Snap. The lock hit the ground. The door began to roll up. I drove away from the storage facility with my headlights off, navigating by the ambient glow of the city smog, until I was 3 blocks away. My heart was hammering a rhythm that would have alarmed a cardiologist, but my hands on the wheel were steady. I had escaped by a margin of inches, slipping into the shadows of an adjacent unit, just as the roller door ascended, then doubling back to my truck while Isabella and her hired muscle were distracted by the interior of Unit 247. I was alive, but I was now operating on borrowed time. The structural integrity of my safety and Lucas's life was groaning under a load it was never designed to bear. I pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour truck stop near the interstate. I needed a secure connection. I opened my laptop and tethered it to my phone, engaging a VPN to mask my location. I uploaded every photograph I had taken in that storage unit to a secure encrypted cloud server I usually reserved for sensitive litigation files. The progress bar crawled across the screen. 10%, 50%, complete. The data was safe. If she caught me now, she could smash my phone and burn my truck, but the blueprints of her crime were immortalized in a server farm in Switzerland. I sat back, the adrenaline receding, to leave a cold, crystalline clarity in its place. I needed to process the data. I closed my eyes and visualized the notebook I had just photographed. Digoxin. I knew chemicals. I knew how chlorides ate through rebar and how sulfates attacked concrete paste. But I needed to understand the biology. I pulled up a medical database. Digoxin is a cardiac glycoside. In controlled doses, it treats heart failure. In the hands of a poisoner, it is a nightmare. The toxicity profile matched Lucas's symptoms with terrifying precision. Confusion, lethargy, visual disturbances, specifically the perception of halos around lights. Lucas had squinted at the chandelier during dinner. He wasn't just tired. His corneas were being chemically altered. The drug has a narrow therapeutic index, meaning the difference between a medicinal dose and a lethal dose is microscopic. Isabella was walking a chemical tightrope, keeping him pliable but alive until Friday. I dialed Frank Miller. It was nearly 3 a.m. He answered on the first ring, his voice thick with cigarette smoke and insomnia. "Tell me you are not calling from a jail cell, Art." "I am not," I said, keeping my voice low. "But I have found it, Frank. I found the command center." I described everything. The diorama with the red arrows, the notebook detailing the dosages, the practice signatures for the power of attorney, the death certificates of the 3 previous husbands. "I have the photos, Frank," I said. "I am sending you the link now. Go get a warrant. We can pick her up before sunrise." There was a long silence on the other end. I heard the flick of a lighter. "Art, listen to me," Frank said, his tone frustratingly calm. "I believe you. You know I do. But a judge is going to look at photos of a dollhouse and a diary and ask if she is writing a crime novel." "It is a murder plan," Frank, I snapped, gripping the steering wheel. "It is circumstantial," he countered. "Unless you have video of her putting the poison in his mouth, or lab results from Lucas's blood showing the digoxin, her lawyer will spin this. She will say the notebook is research for a book. She will say the model is for a renovation project. She will say she practiced the signature to help him because his hand was shaking from his illness. We need the smoking gun, Art. We need to catch her acting on the plan." I felt a surge of frustration, hot and sharp. The law was a structure built on rigid codes, unable to adapt to the shifting soil of reality. "Friday," I said. "She is making her move on Friday. She has a power of attorney document ready." "Then we need to be there," Frank said. "But you cannot go in guns blazing based on pictures of a notebook. You need to get inside that house and get me something concrete. A recording, a sample of the poisoned food, something that stands up in court." I hung up. I was on my own. The police were the fire department. They would only come once the building was already burning. I needed to be the reinforcement crew. My phone pinged. A notification from a mobile game app, Galaxy Conquerors. It was a message from Shadowboy99. "Leo." I opened the chat interface. The message was short, written in the frantic shorthand of a terrified teenager. "Dad fell downstairs 20 minutes ago. She says he jumped. Ambulance came, went. They didn't take him. She talked them out of it. Said he was sleepwalking. Dad is hurt bad, limping, locked in room now." I stared at the screen, my mind flashing back to the diorama in the storage unit. The red arrow pointing to the staircase. The note, loose baluster, trip hazard. It was not an accident. It was a structural failure engineered to look like a suicide attempt or a clumsy fall. She had loosened the connection point on the railing. Lucas, dizzy from the digoxin, had leaned on it for support. The anchor bolt gave way. Gravity did the rest. Isabella was not just a killer. She was a colleague. I realized this with a sickening jolt of recognition. She understood the physics of the world. She understood that if you weaken a support beam, you do not have to push the building over. You just have to wait for the wind to blow. She was an engineer of death. She used mechanical leverage, chemical erosion, and psychological stress loads to bring her targets down. She was accelerating the timeline. The fall was meant to incapacitate him further, to make him more dependent, or perhaps to explain the bruising that would be found on his body later. I put the truck in gear. I was done watching from the perimeter. I was going inside. I drove to my house first. I needed supplies. I went down to my basement workshop, the one place where I felt truly in control. I grabbed my field bag, a heavy canvas satchel I used for site inspections. I dumped the contents on the workbench and began to select my loadout. I needed eyes where I could not fit. I packed my digital borescope. It is a tool used to inspect the inside of wall cavities and pipe chases. It has a 3-foot flexible fiber optic cable with a tiny camera and LED light at the tip. I could slide it under a door, through a ventilation grate, or into a heating duct to see what was happening in the next room without opening it. I needed to detect the invisible. I grabbed my industrial air quality monitor. It was a handheld unit capable of detecting volatile organic compounds, carbon monoxide, and combustible gases in parts per billion. If she tried to stage a gas leak or a CO accident, this device would scream long before the levels became lethal. I needed ears. I took 3 micro recorders the size of USB drives, high-fidelity voice-activated. I taped one to the inside of my belt. The other 2 went into my pocket. Finally, I went to the safe in my study. I took out a small, sealed envelope. I sat at my desk and took out a fresh sheet of paper. To my attorney, James Sterling, I wrote, "If you are reading this, I have died under suspicious circumstances. Do not believe the official report. My death was not an accident. My son, Lucas Vance, is being poisoned by his wife, Isabella. The evidence is stored on my secure cloud server. Password is the date of the Tacoma Narrows Bridge collapse. Give everything to Detective Frank Miller. Protect my grandson." I signed it, dated it, and sealed it in a fresh envelope. I would drop this in the overnight mailbox on my way to Lucas's house. It was a dead man's switch. If she took me out, the truth would detonate 48 hours later. I went to the kitchen. I opened the pantry and took out 2 large cans of organic chicken soup and a box of crackers. I put them in a grocery bag. This was my Trojan horse, the concerned father bringing comfort food to his sick son. It was a flimsy cover, but it relied on social convention. It is very hard to refuse a grandfather standing on your porch with soup in the middle of winter. I put on my heavy coat, concealing the borescope and the air monitor in the deep inner pockets. I felt heavy, weighed down by the equipment and the dread. I looked at the clock. It was 5 in the morning. The sun would be up soon. I drove to Evanston. The streets were empty, the snowplows having cleared a path through the gray slush. I pulled up to Lucas's house. The lights were off, save for a single amber glow in the upstairs master bedroom window. I walked up the driveway. The house loomed over me, silent and imposing. I noticed something I had missed the night before. The railing on the front porch was slightly askew. A screw head was stripped. It was a small detail, but to my trained eye, it screamed of tampering. She was thorough. She turned every environment into a weapon. I pressed the doorbell. I waited. Nothing. I pressed it again, longer this time. I heard movement inside, the heavy thud of a deadbolt. The door cracked open 3 inches, held by a security chain. Isabella's face appeared in the gap. She was wearing a silk robe, her hair tousled, but her eyes were alert, sharp as flint. "Arthur," she said, "it is 5 in the morning. I put on my best performance." I slumped my shoulders. I made my hands tremble slightly. I held up the grocery bag. "I could not sleep, Isabella," I said, my voice wavering. I was so worried about Lucas. "I brought some soup. My mother's recipe always made him feel better. I needed to see him." She stared at me. She was calculating the risk. An old man with soup. Annoying, yes. Dangerous. She did not think so. She did not know about the borescope coiled against my ribs. She did not know I had seen the map of her soul in Unit 247. "Please," I added. "I will just drop it off. I won't stay." She unhooked the chain. The door swung open. "You are sweet, Arthur," she said, stepping back to let me in. "But you really should call first." I stepped across the threshold. The air inside was warm, but it smelled wrong. Beneath the scent of lavender potpourri, my nose, attuned to the sharp odors of construction sites, picked up something else. A faint, metallic tang. The smell of fear. The smell of sickness. "I am sorry," I said, shuffling my boots on the mat. "I just want to help." I was inside. The inspection had begun. And this time, I was not leaving until the building was safe, or I was buried in the rubble. The air inside my son's house was heavy, pressurized like the cabin of a plane before a crash. Isabella led me into the kitchen, pulling her silk robe tighter around herself. She played the part of the exhausted martyr to perfection. There were theatrical dark circles under her eyes, makeup I suspected given the precision of the shading, and her shoulders were slumped in a posture of calculated defeat. "I don't know what to do anymore, Arthur," she whispered, leaning against the marble island. "He is hallucinating. He gets aggressive. Then he cries for hours. I am barely sleeping. I am trying so hard to keep him comfortable, but it is like he is slipping away." It was a brilliant performance. If I had not seen the vials of thallium and the diorama of death in storage unit 247, I might have pitied her. Instead, I felt a cold, hard rage solidifying in my gut like curing concrete. I patted her arm. The contact made my skin crawl. "You are doing a saint's work, Isabella. Why don't you go lie down for an hour? I will sit with him. I will make sure he eats the soup." She hesitated, her eyes scanning my face for any sign of deception. She was a predator assessing a potential threat, but all she saw was a tired, worried grandfather in a flannel shirt. "Are you sure?" she asked. "He can be difficult." "I can handle him," I said softly. "Go. Rest." "You look like you are about to collapse." She nodded, flashing a weak, grateful smile. "Thank you, Arthur. I will just be in the guest room if you need me." As soon as she left the kitchen, the clock started ticking. I did not go to Lucas immediately. I went to work. I pulled the field kit from my deep pockets. I had 3 micro cameras. The first one went into the kitchen. I dragged a chair over to the chandelier above the island. It was an intricate modern fixture with plenty of hiding spots. I wedged the lens no larger than a pinhead into the decorative brass casing, angling it down to cover the countertop, where she prepared his food and coffee. The second camera went into the living room, tucked behind a vent cover. I loosened with my thumbnail. Then, I went upstairs. Lucas's bedroom smelled of sickness, sweat-stale sheets, and the underlying metallic tang of medicine. The curtains were drawn, plunging the room into gloom. My son lay in the center of the king-sized bed, propped up by pillows, looking like a skeleton wrapped in skin. His left leg was in a splint from the fall. "Lucas," I whispered. He stirred, his eyes fluttering open. They were glassy, unfocused. "Dad, is that you? I am here, son." He tried to sit up, but collapsed back against the pillows. "I am sorry, Dad. I am so sorry. Sorry for what I pulled a chair close to the bed. For the stairs," he mumbled, his voice thick and slurred. "I am so clumsy. Isabella told me not to use the railing. She said it was loose. I didn't listen. I never listen. I am a mess. I am ruining everything." My heart broke. This was the gaslighting. She had engineered the failure of the railing, then convinced him that his injury was a result of his own incompetence. She was rewriting his reality, turning him into the villain of his own suffering. "Shh, it is okay," I soothed him, reaching for the water pitcher on the nightstand. I poured a glass, then blocked his view with my body as I pulled a small vial from my pocket. I swapped the pills in his daily dosage cup. I took the 2 yellow tablets digoxin I presumed and pocketed them for analysis. I replaced them with 2 vitamin B complex pills I had shaved down to look identical. It was a crude forgery, but in his state, he would not notice. "Here, take these," I said, handing him the placebos. He swallowed them obediently, trusting me, trusting the system that was killing him. "I need to check the outlet, Lucas," I said loudly for the benefit of any listening devices she might have planted. That lamp was flickering. Fire hazard. I crawled under the nightstand. I unscrewed the faceplate of the electrical outlet. I wired the 3rd camera directly into the power supply, positioning the lens through the ground hole. It gave me a worm's eye view of the entire room, specifically the bedside area where the IV stand loomed, like a metal vulture. I finished just as the door creaked. Leo stood there. My grandson looked even thinner than he had 2 nights ago. He was wearing the same hoodie, his hands shoved deep into the pockets. He looked at his father, then at me. "Is she asleep?" he whispered. "Guest room," I said. Leo jerked his head toward the door. "Come on." I followed him out into the hallway and down the back stairs to the garage. The garage was cold-smelling of oil and gasoline. It was cluttered with Lucas's forgotten hobbies, a dusty kayak, a set of golf clubs, and rows of tools he rarely used. Leo led me to the far wall, behind a stack of winter tires. He pointed to a large abstract painting that Isabella had insisted on hanging in the garage because it didn't fit the vibe inside. It was an ugly thing, a splash of chaotic red and black. "She comes here at night," Leo said, his voice barely audible. "When she thinks everyone is asleep. She talks to the wall. Talks to the wall. There is a hollow spot, behind the painting. I heard her. She has a phone in there. A burner." I nodded. Standard tradecraft for an illicit operation. Segregation of communication channels. "Keep watch," I told him. "If the door handle turns, knock over those rakes. Make a racket." I lifted the painting down. The drywall behind it looked smooth, painted a generic beige. I ran my knuckles along the surface. Thud, 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 hollow. I took out my pocket knife. I did not cut the drywall. That would leave a scar she would see. Instead, I looked at the baseboard. It was slightly loose. I wedged a flathead screwdriver behind the trim and gently pried. The nails groaned, softly yielding. I pulled the baseboard back just an inch. Behind the gap, tucked into the void between the studs, was a small velvet pouch tied to a string. I pulled the string. The pouch slid out. Inside was a cheap prepaid smartphone and a small notebook. I did not turn the phone on. The light might be seen under the door crack. I used a device I had brought from my kit, a data cloner. I plugged it into the phone's charging port. It bypassed the pin lock, sucking the data out like a leech. While it worked, I opened the notebook. It was a ledger, but not for chemicals this time, for money. January 15th. Transfer $200,000 to account B7. January 20th. Liquidate bond portfolio. Convert to Bitcoin. Wallet address ending in XYZ. January 24th. House equity line of credit approved. $500,000. Transfer pending. She was gutting him. She was stripping the copper wire out of the walls before she demolished the building. She was moving millions into offshore crypto accounts that could not be frozen or traced by a standard court order. The cloner beeped softly. Done. I shoved the phone back into the pouch, lowered it into the wall, and hammered the baseboard back into place with the heel of my hand. I rehung the painting. She is stealing everything, Leo, I said, looking at my grandson. She is going to leave you with nothing. I don't care about the money, Leo said fiercely, his eyes wet. I just want my dad back. We are going to get him back, I promised. But we have to play her game for one more day. Can you do that? Yeah. Go back to your room. Lock the door. Do not eat anything she gives you. I returned to the house. I spent the afternoon playing the role of the doting grandfather. I fixed a loose cabinet hinge in the kitchen. I tightened the faucet handle. I made myself useful, non-threatening part of the furniture. Isabella emerged around 4 in the afternoon, looking refreshed and suspicious. She watched me closely as I made tea, but I kept my hands visible, my demeanor cheerful. I think the soup helped him, I said. He is resting peacefully. Good, she said, her eyes flicking to the clock. You should go home, Arthur. You look tired. I will stay a bit longer, I said. Just until he wakes up. I stayed until 8 in the evening. I forced myself to leave, knowing that if I stayed overnight, she would not make her move. She needed privacy to commit murder. I drove my truck around the block and parked it in a dense patch of trees overlooking the rear of the property. I turned off the engine and pulled out my laptop. I connected to the live feed from the cameras I had planted. The screen flickered to life. Camera 1, kitchen, empty. Camera 2, living room, empty. Camera 3, Lucas's bedroom. Lucas was asleep. The room was dark, illuminated only by the faint glow of the streetlights filtering through the curtains. I sat in the freezing cab of my truck, watching the screen, waiting. My breath hung in the air like white smoke. 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, 11. At 11:45, the door to Lucas's bedroom opened. Isabella entered. She was not wearing the robe this time. She was dressed in black yoga pants and a tight, long-sleeve shirt. She moved with purpose. No wasted energy, no hesitation. She walked to the nightstand. She checked Lucas's breathing. She lifted his eyelid with her thumb, checking his pupil response. He moaned, but did not wake. The placebos I had given him were just vitamins. His lethargy was likely the residual effect of weeks of poisoning combined with exhaustion. She walked to the dresser and opened a jewelry box. She took out a small case. From the case, she removed a syringe and a vial. My hand hovered over the door handle of the truck. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run in there, to kick down the door and tear that needle from her hand. But I froze. I remembered Frank Miller's voice. We need the smoking gun. We need to catch her acting on the plan. If I went in now, I would save him from this dose, but she would claim it was insulin. She would claim it was pain medication. She would claim anything, and without the toxicology report or the finished injection, it would be her word against a senile old man. And she still held the power of attorney. She could ban me from the house tomorrow, and then she would finish the job without witnesses. I needed Lucas to be the one to stop her. I needed him lucid enough to sign the revocation papers I had in my bag. I needed him to see her do it. So I watched. I watched on the grainy screen as she injected the clear liquid into the port of his IV bag. She did not inject it directly into his vein. That would be too fast, too suspicious if he died instantly. She put it in the drip, a slow release, a time bomb, thallium, or maybe a massive dose of digoxin. She flicked the tube, ensuring the flow was steady. Then she leaned down and kissed him on the forehead. "Good night, my love," she whispered. The microphone picked it up clearly. It was a chilling, affectionate farewell to a man she had just condemned to death. She left the room. I stared at the screen. The fluid in the bag was dripping. Drip, drip, drip. Each drop was a bullet aimed at my son's heart. I checked the flow rate. It was slow. It would take hours for that bag to empty. The concentration in his blood would rise gradually. I had a window, a terrifyingly small window. I needed to get back in there. I needed to stop that IV before the lethal dose accumulated, but I had to wait until she was asleep. If I confronted her now, she would destroy the evidence. She would flush the syringe. She would pull the IV and say it fell out. I sat in the truck counting the drips on the screen, sweating in the freezing cold. 100 drips, 200. At 1 in the morning, the lights in the house went out completely. I waited another 30 minutes to be sure. Then I grabbed my bag. I grabbed the revocation papers. I grabbed a pry bar. I was not going as a guest this time. I was going as a structural engineer arriving for an emergency shoring operation. The building was collapsing, and I was the only one who could hold up the roof. I moved through the snow, silent as a ghost. I reached the back door. I knew the lock type. I had installed it myself 5 years ago. I slipped a tension wrench into the keyway. Click. I was in. I crept up the stairs, avoiding the squeaky step I had identified on the diorama. I reached Lucas's door. I pushed it open. The IV bag was half empty. I rushed to the side of the bed. I clamped the line shut with a pair of hemostats from my kit. I cut the flow. Lucas stirred. "Dad," he rasped. I leaned close to his ear. "Wake up, son. We have work to do. And you are going to need all your strength." I pulled the IV needle from his arm. I capped the line, preserving the poisoned bag as evidence. I replaced it with a fresh bag of saline I had brought from my own emergency supplies. I kept a medical kit in the truck for site accidents. Lucas looked at me, confusion warring with the fog in his brain. "What are you doing? I am saving your life," I whispered. "Now drink this." I handed him a bottle of water, laced with activated charcoal, a universal absorbent for ingested poisons. It was a gamble, but it might help bind whatever was already in his system. "Drink," I commanded. "And then listen. Because in 3 hours, your wife is going to try to kill you, and you are going to be the one to catch her." For the next 48 hours, I became the project manager of a restoration effort that had to happen in total silence. Recovery is a delicate process. When you pour fresh concrete, you have to keep it wet, keep it covered, and protect it from the elements while it cures. If you expose it too early, it cracks. Lucas was the fresh concrete. I had cut off the poison. The saline IV I had rigged up was flushing his kidneys, and the activated charcoal water was binding the toxins in his gut. But the real medicine was the food. I took over the kitchen duties, playing the role of the bored, tinkering grandfather who just wanted to be useful. I made bone broth. I made scrambled eggs with spinach. I watched every bite go into his mouth, and I watched every plate come back empty. Isabella was getting frustrated. I could see it in the tightness of her jaw. She expected him to be comatose by now, ready for the final stage of her plan. Instead, he was sitting up. The color was returning to his cheeks. The gray pallor of impending organ failure was fading, replaced by the faint pink flush of life. I had to be careful. If he looked too healthy, she would accelerate the timeline. She would skip the subtle poisoning and go straight to a pillow over the face. So I taught him how to lie. On Thursday morning, Isabella left the house for 2 hours. She claimed she had an emergency session with her therapist to deal with the stress of her husband's decline. I knew better. She was meeting her accomplice. She was finalizing the logistics for the funeral. As soon as her Audi pulled out of the driveway, I locked the front door and ran upstairs. Lucas was sitting on the edge of the bed, flexing his hands. The tremors were almost gone. "Dad," he said, his voice clear for the first time in months. "I can feel my fingers again. The numbness is receding." "Good," I said. "Now brace yourself. We need to do a structural assessment." I opened my laptop on his bedside table. I did not sugarcoat it. I did not soften the blow. You cannot fix a foundation if you do not expose the rot. "Watch," I said. I played the video from the hidden camera. The timestamp was Tuesday night. The screen showed Isabella entering his room. It showed the needle. It showed the cold, clinical precision with which she injected the toxin into his IV bag. It showed her kissing his forehead. Lucas watched in silence. He did not blink. He did not look away. But I saw his hands grip the bedsheet so tight his knuckles turned white. Then I pulled up the photos from storage unit 247, the diorama with the red arrows pointing to the stairs, the death certificates of Robert, Michael, and Julian, the notebook entries calling him Subject 4, Lucas made a sound I will never forget. It was not a scream. It was a low, guttural noise like a beam snapping under immense pressure. He bent over, burying his face in his hands, and his shoulders began to heave. He did not cry out loud. He wept with the terrifying silence of a man watching his entire reality collapse into dust. She called me her soulmate, he choked out. She picked out the tile for this bathroom with me. We talked about growing old here. It was a script, Lucas, I said, gently placing a hand on his back. It was a blueprint. She was not building a life with you. She was building a scaffold for your execution. He looked up at me. His eyes were red, but the fog was gone. The confusion that the drugs had induced was replaced by a sharp, agonizing clarity. She killed them, he whispered. Those other men. Yes. And she was going to kill me on Friday. Yes. And she still thinks she is going to. Lucas wiped his face with the back of his hand. The grief was still there, but beneath it I saw something else. I saw the engineer. I saw the man who solved problems for a living. What do we do? He asked. We act, I said. You are getting better, Lucas. Your body is fighting back. But you cannot let her see that. If she knows you are lucid, she will panic. And a panicked demolition expert is dangerous. You have to play the part. I spent the next hour coaching him. I taught him how to slur his speech, dragging the vowels out like his tongue was too heavy for his mouth. I taught him how to unfocus his eyes, looking past people instead of at them. I taught him to fake the tremors he had actually suffered from just 2 days ago. When she comes back, I said, you are not Lucas the architect. You are subject 4. You are confused. You are weak. You are dying. Can you do that? Lucas looked at the screen one last time, at the image of the woman he loved injecting poison into his veins. I can do it, he said. I left him to practice his decline and went to the garage. I had a nagging suspicion. The diorama in the storage unit had an arrow pointing to the garage labeled brake line access. I found Lucas's vintage Mustang under a tarp. It was his pride and joy, the car he took out on sunny Sundays. If he decided to make a run for it, this is the car he would take. I slid under the chassis with my flashlight. It took me 3 seconds to find it. The bleeder valve on the rear left caliper was wet. It had been loosened just a quarter turn. Not enough to drain the fluid immediately, but enough that if you slammed on the brakes at 60 miles an hour, the pressure would blow the seal, the pedal would go to the floor, and the car would become a missile. She had trapped him in a box where every exit was rigged with explosives. I tightened the valve with my pocket wrench and wiped the fluid away. One trap disarmed. I went back inside. Isabella returned at noon. She looked energized, her cheeks flushed. She carried the scent of cold air and expensive coffee. "How is he?" she asked, dropping her keys on the counter. I was standing at the sink washing vegetables. I did not turn around immediately. I needed a moment to compose my face. "Not good," I said, keeping my voice heavy. He slept most of the morning. He woke up once asking for his mother. Isabella made a sympathetic noise. "Poor dear. I should go check on him." She walked past me. As she passed the stove where a pot of water was boiling for tea, she stumbled. It was a slight movement, a trip over nothing. Her hand flailed out, striking the handle of the kettle. The pot tipped. Boiling water arched through the air, aimed directly at my midsection. In my prime, I had dodged swinging steel beams and falling debris. You do not survive 40 years on construction sites without reflexes. I did not think. I twisted my body to the left, pivoting on my heel. The water splashed onto the floor where I had been standing a fraction of a second before sending up a cloud of steam. I looked up. Isabella was staring at me. For a microsecond before she could rearrange her features, I saw it. Disappointment. Pure, cold disappointment that I was not screaming in agony. "Oh my God," she shrieked, covering her mouth. "Arthur, I am so clumsy, did I burn you?" I stared at the puddle of steaming water. If that had hit me, I would be in the burn unit. I would be out of the house. I would be out of the way. I am fine, Isabella, I said, my voice steady, though my heart was racing. I moved. You have remarkable reflexes, she said. Her eyes narrowed slightly. Old habits, I said. Hazard perception. The air in the kitchen was suddenly electric with tension. She knew. Somewhere deep in her lizard brain, she knew I was not just a bumbling old man. The game of cat and mouse had shifted. The mouse was armed. We need to finish this. Today. I went to the medicine cabinet in the downstairs bathroom. I found the prescription bottle for the anxiety medication she had been feeding Lucas. The doctor's name was on the label. Dr. Sergei Kavinsky. I pulled out my phone and did a quick search. Dr. Kavinsky had a practice in the city. 2 stars on Yelp. Reviews complaining about overprescription. But then I dug deeper. I checked the state licensing board database. Kavinsky had been reprimanded 3 years ago for inappropriate relationships with pharmaceutical reps. And his office address. It was in the same building as the gallery where Isabella claimed to work. He was not just a doctor. He was the supplier. He was the one providing the thallium and the high-dose digoxin under the table. I needed to get the legal documents signed. I had the new will and the revocation of power of attorney hidden in the lining of my jacket. But I could not get Lucas to sign them with Isabella hovering like a vulture. I found Leo in the living room. He was reading a book or pretending to. Leo the First whispered, "Code Red." He looked up. "What do you need?" I need a diversion. A big one. 5 minutes. He nodded. He did not ask questions. He just closed his book. 10 minutes later, a scream tore through the house. It came from the upstairs bathroom. "Dad, Grandpa, help!" I ran up the stairs. Isabella was already there, pounding on the bathroom door. "Leo, what is wrong?" she yelled. The door flew open. Leo was on the floor, clutching his stomach, writhing in agony. He had made himself vomit into the toilet. I could smell it, and he was sweating profusely. "My stomach," he screamed. "It burns. I ate that tuna. It burns." Isabella looked disgusted and panicked. "Food poisoning. In my house." "He needs the hospital," I shouted, adding to the chaos. "He looks like he is going into shock." Isabella grabbed his arm. "Stop screaming. You are just sick." "I have some medicine." "No," I yelled. "I will get him water." "You find the thermometer." "Go." I shoved her toward the master bathroom, where the medical supplies were. She hesitated, looking between Leo and Lucas's room, but the noise was overwhelming. She ran to get the thermometer. "Go," I whispered to Leo. "Keep screaming." I slipped into Lucas's room. He was sitting up alert. He heard the noise. "Is it time?" he asked. "Sign," I said, pulling the papers from my jacket. I slapped the documents onto the bedside table. I handed him a pen. Lucas's hand hovered over the paper. This was it. This was the moment he cut the strings. This was the moment he took back his life. He signed his name, Lucas Vance. The signature was not the shaky, drug-induced scrawl I had seen on the bank transfers. It was sharp, angular, strong. He signed the will. He signed the revocation. I grabbed the papers. I folded them and shoved them into my back pocket. I checked the time. 2 minutes had passed. I grabbed the daily medical logbook from the nightstand, the one Isabella kept to show Kavinsky. I swapped it with a forgery I had spent the morning creating in the guest room. My version showed a rapid, terrifying decline in heart rate and cognitive function. It showed that Lucas was fading fast. When she read this, she would think the poison was working better than expected. She would feel confident. She would feel safe to proceed with the Friday finale. I ran back out into the hall. Isabella was coming out of the bathroom with a thermometer. "He stopped screaming," I said, panting. "I think he passed out. Or just exhausted himself." Leo was lying on the bath mat, groaning theatrically. Isabella looked at him, then at me. "Fine," she snapped. "I will call Dr. Kavinsky. He can call in a prescription for nausea." "No need," I said. I will go to the pharmacy. I need to get my own blood pressure medication anyway. I left it at home. I need to get these documents to my lawyer. Now. I looked at Isabella. She was flustered, annoyed, and distracted. She had no idea that in the last 3 minutes, she had lost control of the entire building. The title deed was gone. The power was gone. I am going to the pharmacy, I repeated. I will be back in an hour. Drive safe, she muttered, not even looking at me. She was staring at Lucas's door, calculating. I walked down the stairs, the signed papers burning a hole in my pocket. I walked out into the cold air. I got into my truck. I did not go to the pharmacy. I drove straight to the overnight drop box of my attorney's office. I slid the envelope inside. Clunk. The sound of the metal flap closing was the most satisfying sound I had heard in years. It sounded like a deadbolt sliding home. Lucas was safe legally. Now I just had to keep him alive physically for 24 more hours. Tomorrow was Friday. Tomorrow the walls were going to come tumbling down. Friday arrived with the kind of brutal gray dawn that makes Chicago feel less like a city and more like a prison yard. The sky was a flat sheet of slate pressing down on the rooftops. Inside the house, the atmosphere was pressurized. Isabella was vibrating with energy. She had dressed for the occasion in a sharp crimson power suit that looked like a splash of fresh blood against the white marble of the kitchen. She made the announcement at 8 in the morning. "Lucas, darling," she said, buttering a piece of toast with precise, violent strokes. "I have asked the legal team from Omnibuild to come over at noon, and Mr. Henderson, the notary." Lucas, slumped in his chair, playing his part, perfectly, blinked slowly. "Why to finalize the transfer?" she said, her voice dripping with faux concern. "You are not well, my love. We discussed this. You need to focus on getting better, not on board meetings and quarterly reports. I will take the burden for a few months, just until you are back on your feet." It was the end game, the transfer of power. Once he signed those papers, he became redundant, a liability. The heart attack would happen tonight, probably triggered by an accidental overdose or a shock to his system. I stood by the coffee machine, gripping my mug. This was the signal. "I need to go to the garage," I mumbled. "Check the tires on my truck." I walked out into the freezing air. As soon as the heavy door clicked shut, I pulled out my burner phone. I dialed Frank Miller. "It is happening," I said. "Noon." "We are ready," Frank's voice crackled. "We have a van down the street. Surveillance is live." "But Art, remember what I said. We need the confession. Or we need to catch her in the act. If you go in too early, it is just a business meeting." "I know," I said. "I will get it." I hung up. My hands were sweating despite the cold. I had to do the hardest thing I had ever done in my life. I had to sell my soul, or at least pretend to. I went back inside. Isabella was in the study, arranging documents on the mahogany desk. She looked up when I entered, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Is everything okay, Arthur?" I closed the door behind me. I turned the lock. "We need to talk, Isabella." She straightened up, her smile vanishing. "About what? About storage unit 247, I said. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a vacuum. Her face went blank, totally devoid of expression, like a mask had slipped. For a second I thought she might pull a gun from the desk drawer. "I don't know what you are talking about," she said, her voice ice cold. "I think you do," I said, keeping my voice steady, injecting a note of greedy desperation into it. "I know about the diorama. I know about the digoxin. I know about Robert Michael and Julian." She stared at me. She was assessing the threat level. She was calculating. And she asked, "Are you going to call the police? Because if you do, Arthur, who are they going to believe? The grieving wife or the senile old man who broke into a storage facility illegally?" I stepped closer. I let my shoulders slump. I licked my lips, looking nervous. "I don't want to call the police," I said. "I am 68 years old, Isabella. I have a pension that barely covers my heating bill. I drive a truck with 200,000 miles on it." Her eyes flickered. interest. I don't care about Lucas. I lied, praying my son would forgive me for these words. He never listened to me anyway. He is weak, but omni-build. That is $100 million company, and you are about to take it all, she smiled. It was a slow, terrifying unfurling of lips. You want a cut? She whispered. I want 20%, I said. 10, she countered instantly. 15, I said. And I walk away. I go back to my wood shop. You never see me again. And whatever happens to Lucas, well, accidents happen. She laughed. It was a genuine sound of amusement. I knew I liked you, Arthur. You are a survivor, just like me. She walked around the desk and stood in front of me. She smelled of expensive vanilla and rot. Fine, she said. 15%. But only after the life insurance clears. That is another $5 million. So the plan is for tonight? I asked, kneading it on the tape. The micro recorder taped to my chest was burning against my skin. Tonight, she confirmed. After the signing. I have a new cocktail prepared. It mimics a massive coronary. Clean. Simple. He dies in his sleep. And the autopsy, cremation Arthur. It is already in his file. No autopsy. I nodded. Deal. Deal. She reached out and shook my hand. Her skin was dry and cool. I felt sick to my stomach, but I had it. I had the confession. I unlocked the door and walked out. I needed to get away from her before I threw up. I went to the kitchen to find Leo. He was sitting at the table looking pale. He was tapping his foot nervously. Grandpa, he whispered as I passed. Not now, Leo. No, Grandpa, listen, he hissed. The heater. I stopped. What I heard a noise. In the basement. Like ticking. And it smells funny. Like rotten eggs, but sweeter. My blood ran cold. Rotten eggs is the smell of mercaptan, the additive they put in natural gas. But sweet, that meant something else was mixing with it. I glanced at the hallway. Isabella was back in the study, probably gloating. Show me, I whispered. We went down the narrow stairs to the basement. It was a finished basement used mostly for storage and utilities. The mechanical room was in the back. As soon as I opened the door to the utility room, the smell hit me. Gas. Definitely gas. But it was not filling the room yet. It was localized. I pulled out my flashlight. I knelt by the main furnace unit. There it was. It was a piece of engineering that was both brilliant and psychotic. She had bypassed the safety regulator on the gas line. She had installed a secondary valve connected to a digital timer, a cheap kitchen timer wired into a solenoid. But that was not the worst part. Next to the gas outlet, she had placed a spark plug rigged to a car battery. The timer was counting down. 3 hours. She was not just going to poison Lucas. That was plan A. This was the insurance policy. If the signing went wrong, or if she needed to eliminate all the evidence including me and Leo, she would blow the house off its foundation. A gas explosion in a confined space like this creates a pressure wave, moving at supersonic speeds. It would lift the entire first-floor structure and drop it into the basement. It would look like a tragic furnace malfunction. Arthur Leo whispered, his voice trembling. Is that a bomb? Yes, I said. I reached for the wires to cut them, but I stopped. My hand hovered over the red wire connecting the timer to the battery. If I cut this, the timer stops. But if she checks it on her phone, these smart timers are often Wi-Fi enabled, she will know. And if she knows the bomb is disabled, she might panic and do something even more drastic upstairs. Or she might have a remote trigger. I looked at the pipework. I was a structural engineer. I knew how forces moved. I knew how to redirect them. I cannot disarm it, Leo, I said. Not yet. If I touch it, she might see the signal drop. We have to let it count down. But I turned to the ventilation shaft above the furnace. It was a galvanized steel duct, 12 inches wide, leading directly outside. I grabbed a wrench from my belt. I worked furiously, unbolting the section of the duct that connected to the main house vents. I disconnected it. Then, I used a piece of flex pipe from the dryer vent and jury-rigged a direct line from the gas leak source to the outside vent. If the gas valve opens, I explained, panting, the gas won't fill the room. It will vent directly outside. The spark will fire, but there will be no fuel to ignite. It will just be a little pop. It was a crude solution, a bypass for the bypass, but it would hold. "Let's go," I said. "The lawyers will be here in 20 minutes." We went back upstairs, washing the smell of the basement off our hands. I felt a grim calm settling over me. She had tried to kill us with chemistry. She had tried to kill us with physics. But she had forgotten that I had spent 40 years studying how to keep things standing. At noon, the doorbell rang. The sharks arrived. There were 3 of them. 2 lawyers from a firm I knew by reputation, sharks, who specialized in corporate takeovers, and Mr. Henderson, a notary public who looked nervous and sweaty. Isabella greeted them like royalty. She offered coffee, sparkling water charm. She sat them at the dining room table, arranging the papers in neat stacks. "Bring him down," she ordered me, snapping her fingers. I went upstairs to get Lucas. He was dressed in a bathrobe and pajamas. I had helped him shave, but we left a few patches of stubble to enhance the look of neglect. He leaned heavily on his cane. "Showtime," I whispered. He looked at me. His eyes were clear, sharp, and cold as steel. "I am ready." I helped him down the stairs. He dragged his left leg, groaning slightly with each step. He played the invalid perfectly. When we entered the dining room, the lawyers stood up, their expressions a mix of pity and impatience. "Mr. Vance," the lead lawyer said. "Good to see you." Lucas grunted, sinking into the chair at the head of the table. He looked around the room, blinking, as if the light hurt his eyes. Isabella stood behind him, her hands resting on his shoulders. Her grip was firm. The structural brace. "Let's get this over with," Isabella said briskly. "Lucas is very tired." The lawyer pushed a heavy document toward Lucas. "This is the transfer of voting rights, Mr. Vance. It gives your wife full control over your shares in OmniBuild Solutions. It also grants her power of attorney over your medical decisions." Lucas stared at the paper. His hand shook as he reached for the pen. Isabella smiled. It was the smile of a hunter watching the trap snap shut. She leaned down, whispering in his ear, "Just sign it, baby. Then you can rest." Lucas held the pen. He lowered the tip to the paper. I watched Isabella's face. She was practically glowing. She was already spending the money. She was already planning the funeral outfit. The pen touched the paper. Then it stopped. Lucas froze. Isabella frowned. "Lucas, honey sign right there. By the X." Lucas slowly lifted the pen. He looked at the tip. Then he sat up. He did not just sit up. He straightened his spine. The slump vanished. The tremors ceased. The fog in his eyes cleared instantly, replaced by a gaze of such intense burning hatred that the lawyer actually flinched back. Lucas turned in his chair. He looked up at Isabella. The room went dead silent. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall, and the phantom ticking of the bomb in the basement. "Isabella," Lucas said. His voice was not slurred. It was a baritone rumble, strong and resonant. She blinked, confused. Lucas held up the pen. He twirled it between his fingers with the dexterity of a magician. "This pen," he said. He dropped the pen onto the table. It clattered loudly against the wood. "It is out of ink," Lucas said. "Just like your love." Isabella's face went white. Whatever color she had worn was drained instantly. "You..." "What I said, it is over." Lucas stood up. He pushed the chair back. He stood to his full height, 6 feet 2 inches of angry architect. He did not need the cane. He kicked it away. "I am revoking the power of attorney," Lucas announced, his voice booming off the walls. "I am firing these lawyers, and I am filing for divorce." Isabella stumbled back. Her hands flew to her mouth. "But... you..." The medicine. The vitamins, Lucas stepped toward her. Or the poison. Which one are you referring to, Isabella? The thallium. The lawyers looked at each other, panic dawning on their faces. Isabella looked at me. Her eyes were wide, terrified. Arthur. But. We had a deal. I pulled the recorder from my shirt. I held it up. The red light was blinking steady and true. We did, I said. I promised to help you get what you deserve. I pressed the stop button. And now, I said, I think you have an appointment. The front door crashed open. Police. She reached into her blazer. The moment Frank Miller kicked that door in, the illusion of the happy, wealthy Vance family did not just crack. It shattered into a million razor-sharp shards. The dining room became a kaleidoscope of shouting voices, drawn weapons, and the smell of ozone and fear. Police, get on the ground. Frank roared, his service weapon leveled at Isabella's chest. Two uniformed officers fanned out, flanking the table, their boots thudding heavy on the hardwood floor. Most people, when faced with the barrel of a Glock 17, freeze. They crumble. They weep. But Isabella Ricci was not most people. She did not scream. She did not raise her hands. Instead, she threw her head back and laughed. It was a sound devoid of mirth, a dry hacking noise that sounded like a saw hitting a nail in the wood. "You think this is over?" she screamed, her voice shredding the sophisticated veneer she had worn for years. "You think you can just arrest me? I am the one who writes the ending." She raised the phone in her hand. Her thumb hovered over the screen. "Drop it," Frank yelled. "Drop the phone." I knew what was coming. I had vented the main gas line, yes. I had diverted the flow. But in that split second, a terrifying variable occurred to me. What if there was a secondary charge? What if she had rigged a backup explosive that I had missed in my inspection? Engineering relies on predictability, but insanity is inherently unpredictable. Isabella pressed the button. I flinched instinctively, turning my back to the blast wave I expected to tear through the floorboards. I waited for the heat. I waited for the roar that would deafen us all. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Nothing. The house did not explode. The floor did not buckle. Even the faint whump of the igniter I had heard earlier was absent this time. The phone screen just glowed harmlessly in her hand. Isabella stared at the device, her eyes bulging. She tapped it again, frantically, violently. "Work," she shrieked. "Why won't you connect?" "Because you are offline," a voice said. We all turned. Leo was standing in the doorway of the kitchen. My grandson, who had spent the last 6 months hiding in his hoodie, eating cold ravioli, and making himself invisible, was standing tall. In his hand, he held a strange, ugly device. It looked like a dense brick of circuit boards, copper wire, and duct tape powered by 4 9-volt batteries. A small, red LED on top was pulsing steadily. "I built a signal jammer," Leo said, his voice cracking slightly, but gaining strength. "I figured out the frequency you use for your burner phone. I flooded the spectrum. No signal goes in. No signal goes out. You are disconnected." I looked at the device. It was crude. It was messy. It was beautiful. My grandson had engineered a firewall. Isabella looked at Leo with pure, unadulterated loathing. "You little parasite," she hissed. "I should have dealt with you months ago." She dropped the phone. It clattered uselessly onto the Persian rug. "Okay, that is enough." Frank moved in handcuffs unclipped from his belt. "Ms. Ricci, put your hands behind your back." Isabella smiled. It was the smile of a cornered rat that realizes it has nothing left to lose but its teeth. "No," she whispered. She moved with a speed that shocked me. Her hand dipped into her Hermes Birkin bag, sitting on the sideboard. I expected her to pull out a lawyer's card or maybe another phone. She pulled out a gun. It was a compact semi-automatic, sleek and black, with a cylindrical suppressor screwed onto the barrel. "A professional's weapon, gun," Frank shouted, diving for cover behind the heavy oak dining table. The officers scattered. Lucas, who was still standing near his chair, froze. He was an architect, not a soldier. He did not know how to process the sight of his wife, holding a lethal weapon. Isabella did not aim at the police. She lunged forward and grabbed the person closest to her. Leo. She wrapped her left arm around my grandson's neck, hauling him backward. She jammed the barrel of the silenced pistol into his temple. "Back off," she screamed. "Back off or I paint this wall with his brains." The room froze. The air was sucked out of the space. Frank lowered his weapon slightly, holding up a hand. "Easy, Isabella." Frank said, his voice calm but tight. "Let the boy go. There is no way out of here." "I am walking out," she yelled. "I am taking the car, and he is coming with me. Anyone follows, he dies. Anyone shoots, he dies." She began to drag Leo backward toward the kitchen door, which led to the garage. Leo was clawing at her arm, his face turning red, his eyes wide with terror. He looked at me. "Grandpa." I was 15 feet away, too far to tackle her, too old to outrun a bullet. If I charged, she would pull the trigger before I took 2 steps. I needed a distraction. I needed a structural failure. I looked around frantically. My eyes landed on the large display cabinet against the wall between us. It was a massive piece of furniture, dark walnut filled with heavy crystal decanters, and Lucas's collection of rare scotch. It weighed at least 300 pounds. And I noticed something else. One of the front legs was sitting on a small felt pad to protect the floor. It was a pivot point. I was still holding the piece of oak trim I had been fixing earlier that morning, a sturdy length of wood about 2 feet long. I did not think. I calculated. Force equals mass times acceleration. "Hey!" I shouted. Isabella's eyes flicked to me for a fraction of a second. I lunged, not at her, but at the cabinet. I jammed the piece of wood under the base of the cabinet right near the front leg, and I heaved upward with every ounce of strength remaining in my 68-year-old body. The cabinet tipped. Gravity took over. The center of gravity shifted past the tipping point. The massive structure groaned, leaned, and then fell forward with the inevitability of a collapsing skyscraper. Isabella screamed as the shadow of the falling furniture loomed over her. She instinctively flinched back, loosening her grip on Leo. Crash. The sound was deafening. Glass shattered, wood splintered. Bottles of expensive scotch exploded, sending shards and amber liquid flying like shrapnel. The cabinet crashed to the floor between Isabella and Leo, creating a jagged barrier of debris. "Run, Leo!" I roared. Leo scrambled away, crawling over the broken glass, cutting his hands, but moving fast. Isabella recovered instantly. She was cut on the cheek by flying glass blood welling up, but she still had the gun. She raised it, aiming through the cloud of alcohol vapor at Leo's retreating back. She fired. Pfft. The sound of the silenced shot was like a heavy book being slammed shut. But the bullet did not hit Leo. Lucas had moved. My son, who 5 minutes ago had been pretending to be a cripple, who had been poisoned and gaslighted for months, launched himself through the air. He dove across the room, tackling Leo to the ground, shielding the boy's body with his own. The bullet buried itself in the plaster wall, where Leo's head had been a second before. Isabella turned the gun. She swept the room, looking for a target. Her eyes locked on me. "You," she snarled. "You ruined everything. Old man." She raised the weapon. I saw the black hole of the barrel. I saw her finger tighten on the trigger. I tried to dive, but my knees were slow. Pfft, pfft. 2 shots. I felt a sensation like a hot branding iron being pressed against my left shoulder. The impact spun me around. I hit the wall and slid down. There was no pain at first, just a numb shock, and the sudden warmth of blood soaking my flannel shirt. Arthur Frank yelled, opening fire from behind the table. Bang, bang, bang. The police rounds were deafening in the enclosed space. They tore into the wall behind Isabella, showering her with drywall dust. She ducked, screaming in rage. She knew she was outgunned. She could not win a firefight. She needed a new plan. She looked at the door to the basement, the gas. She scrambled backward, firing one last wild shot that shattered the window and bolted through the basement door. She slammed it shut, and I heard the lock click. "She is going for the manual valve," I shouted, clutching my bleeding shoulder. "She is going to use a lighter. If she opened the main valve fully and used an open flame, my jury-rigged vent bypass would not be enough. The bypass could handle a leak. It could not handle a full-flow ignition. She would blow the foundation. She would bring the whole house down on top of us." Frank rushed to the basement door. He kicked it. It held, solid oak. "Get the ram," he yelled to the officers. There is no time, I gritted out, forcing myself to stand up. The pain in my shoulder flared hot and jagged, but I pushed it down. Adrenaline is a powerful anesthetic. I knew this house. I had built the addition 10 years ago. I knew there was a secondary access panel to the basement in the pantry, a laundry chute that dropped directly into the utility room. I looked at Lucas. He was holding Leo on the floor. They were both covered in glass, but they were alive. Lucas looked at me, seeing the blood spreading on my shoulder. "Dad, you are hit. Stay down," I commanded. "Keep him safe." I ran to the pantry. My vision was swimming slightly, black spots dancing at the edges, but my mind was clear. This was the final inspection. The rogue element had retreated to the core of the structure, intending to trigger a catastrophic failure. I opened the laundry chute door. It was tight, a metal box about 18 inches square. I was not a small man, but I had lost weight since Martha died. And I was motivated by the only force stronger than gravity, the need to protect my family. I grabbed the edge of the chute. I swung my legs in. "Arthur, don't!" Frank yelled from the hallway. "Wait for the breach. If we wait, we die." I yelled back. I let go. I slid down the metal darkness. It was a terrifying claustrophobic slide smelling of dryer sheets and old dust. I tumbled out the bottom, hitting a pile of dirty towels in the laundry basket. I groaned as the impact jarred my wounded shoulder, sending a fresh wave of agony down my arm. I rolled out of the basket onto the concrete floor of the basement. The air in the utility room was thick enough to chew. It tasted of sulfur and imminent death. The only light came from the dancing yellow flame of the Zippo lighter in Isabella's hand, and the weak, flickering pilot light of the water heater. She stood with her back to the furnace, her left hand gripping the large red valve of the main gas line. She had managed to twist it partially open, bypassing my bypass, and the hiss of escaping gas was a sibilant snake in the darkness. I stood 10 feet away, blood soaking the left side of my flannel shirt from the bullet graze on my shoulder. My arm hung uselessly at my side, burning with a white-hot intensity, but I locked my knees. If I fell now, we all died. "Stay back," Isabella screamed. Her voice was unrecognizable. It was raw, stripped of all the cultured modulation she had perfected over the years. Her eyes were wide, the whites showing all around the irises, darting frantically between me and the lighter. "You cannot win, Isabella," I said, keeping my voice low and level. It was the voice I used when telling a site foreman that his scaffolding was unsafe. Calm, authoritative, final. "The police are upstairs. The exits are blocked. Turn off the valve." No, she twisted the valve another half-turn. The hissing grew louder. "I am not going to prison, Arthur. I am not going to sit in a cage while you people laugh at me. I survived everything. I survived my father. I survived the poverty. I survived every man who tried to use me." She waved the lighter, the flame jumping erratically. "You think I am the monster," she spat. "You have no idea what it takes to survive in this world when you have nothing. I did what I had to do. Those men, Robert, Michael, Julian. They were weak. They wanted a trophy. I gave them what they wanted, and I took what I needed. It is called self-preservation, Arthur. It is the law of nature." I looked at her, and for the first time I saw the structural flaw at the core of her soul. She truly believed she was the victim. She had constructed a narrative where her greed was actually defense, where her cruelty was actually strength. "That is not self-preservation," I said, stepping 1 inch closer. "That is predation. "Don't you judge me," she shrieked, backing up until she hit the concrete wall. "You sit there with your pension and your family and your moral high ground. You don't know what it is like to be hungry. I built myself from nothing. I am a masterpiece." I shook my head slowly. "No," I said. "You are not a masterpiece. You are a termite." She froze her mouth open. "You do not build anything, Isabella." I continued, my voice hardening. "You burrow into solid structures. You eat them from the inside out. You consume the people who love you until they are hollow shells, and then you move on to the next one. You are not a survivor. You are an infestation. And infestations get exterminated." The insult hit her like a physical blow. Her face twisted into a mask of pure, ugly rage. The vanity that drove her, the narcissism that fueled her, could not handle the truth. "Go to hell," she whispered. She looked down at the lighter. She looked at the gas pipe. I saw the muscles in her thumb tense. She was going to do it. She was going to drop the lighter into the stream of gas. I did not have time to run to her. I did not have the speed to tackle her. I had less than a second. But I had the environment. I knew this basement. I knew the air pressure differential. Outside it was 10 degrees below zero. Inside it was 65 degrees. The basement was a pressurized box of warm air. High up on the wall to my right, about 7 feet off the ground, was a hopper window, a small rectangular vent window, used for airflow. It was latched shut, sealed against the winter. I did not look at the window. I kept my eyes locked on Isabella, but my right hand, my good hand, moved to the tool belt I was still wearing. I grabbed the heavy steel hammer I had used earlier. Isabella flicked her wrist to throw the lighter. At the exact same moment, I pivoted and hurled the hammer with every ounce of rotational force I could generate. It was a Hail Mary pass, a desperate calculation of trajectory and force. The hammer spun through the gloomy air. Crash! The steel head smashed through the single-pane glass of the hopper window. The effect was instantaneous and violent. When you puncture a pressurized vessel, the equalization is explosive. The freezing cold, heavy air from the Chicago winter came rushing in through the broken window, like a physical solid slamming into the warm, rising air of the basement. It created a sudden, turbulent downdraft, a localized wind shear. The draft hit the utility room. The flame on Isabella's lighter, which had just left her hand, wavered. The wind caught it. The flame was snuffed out, instantly blown into nothingness, before it could ignite the pocket of gas near the floor. The lighter hit the concrete with a metallic clink. Cold, dead. Isabella stared at the lighter, stunned. She looked up at the broken window, where snow and freezing wind were now pouring in, swirling the gas away, diluting the mixture below the combustion threshold. She had failed. Physics had beaten her. I did not hesitate. I roared, ignoring the screaming pain in my shoulder, and launched myself across the 10 feet separating us. I hit her with the momentum of a falling wall. We crashed into the furnace, the metal booming under our weight. Isabella was 30 years younger than me. She was wiry, strong, and fueled by the adrenaline of the insane. She fought like a wildcat. She clawed at my face, her nails raking furrows down my cheek. She kicked at my shins. "Get off me!" she screamed, thrashing wildly. I grunted, using my weight to pin her against the pipes. I did not try to punch her. I used the leverage techniques I had learned in my youth working on steel gangs. I grabbed her wrist, the one that had reached for the lighter, and twisted it into a joint lock. Snap! She shrieked as her wrist hyperextended, but she did not stop. "You old fool," she hissed. She reached into her sleeve with her free hand. I had missed it. I had missed the backup weapon. A glimmer of silver. A blade. It was a small, nasty paring knife, probably stolen from the kitchen during the chaos. I tried to catch her arm, but my left shoulder gave out. My reflex was too slow. She drove the knife down. I felt a thud in my right thigh. It felt like being punched with a fist full of quarters. Then came the heat. Deep, searing heat. She had stabbed me. I gasped, my leg buckling. I slipped to one knee. Isabella ripped the knife out, preparing to strike again. Her eyes were lit with triumph. She raised the blade, aiming for my neck. "Die," she screamed. I looked up, unable to move, unable to block. Then the door to the utility room exploded inward. It wasn't opened. It was kicked off its hinges. Lucas stood there. He looked like a demon. His bathrobe was torn, his face was covered in drywall dust and blood from the glass, and his eyes were burning with a terrifying fire. He saw me on my knees. He saw the blood pouring from my leg. He saw the woman he had married raising a knife to kill his father. He did not hesitate. Lucas did not shout. He did not ask her to stop. He moved with a speed I did not know he possessed. He crossed the room in 2 strides. Isabella turned toward the noise, but it was too late. Lucas swung his leg, his good leg, in a vicious, powerful arc. A soccer kick. A punt intended to send a ball into the stratosphere. His foot connected with Isabella's wrist. Crack. The sound of bone breaking was distinct and sickening. The knife flew out of her hand, spinning across the room and clattering into the darkness. Isabella howled, clutching her shattered wrist, doubling over. Lucas grabbed her by the back of her blazer and the hair. He slammed her into the concrete wall. "Don't you touch him!" Lucas roared. His voice cracked with emotion. "Don't you ever touch my family again!" He pinned her there. His forearm pressed against her throat, holding her feet off the ground. She kicked and sputtered, but he was immovable. He was the load-bearing wall now. He was the steel. Frank Miller and the uniformed officers swarmed into the room a second later. Police dropped her step away. Lucas held her for 1 second longer, staring into her eyes, making sure she saw him. Making sure she saw that the man she thought was a crumbling ruin was actually the one who had defeated her. Then he let go. Isabella slid to the floor, sobbing, clutching her broken wrist. Officers swarmed her. Zip ties were cinched tight. "Get a medic!" Frank yelled, rushing to my side. "We have an officer down!" Civilian down, I slumped against the furnace, the adrenaline finally fading, leaving behind a tidal wave of pain. My leg was throbbing in time with my heart. My shoulder was on fire. Lucas was beside me instantly. He ripped the belt off his bathrobe and wrapped it around my thigh, cinching it tight to stop the bleeding. "Dad. Dad, look at me. Stay with me." I looked at him. His hands were steady as he tied the tourniquet. His eyes were clear. "I am okay," I wheezed. "Just a leak. Nothing structural." They hauled Isabella to her feet. She was weeping now, a chaotic mess of snot and tears, the grandeur completely gone. As they dragged her past us toward the stairs, she looked at Lucas. "I loved you," she wailed, trying one last manipulation. "I did it for us." Lucas did not even look at her. He finished tightening the belt on my leg and checked my pulse. He treated her like background noise, like a siren passing in the distance. "Get her out of here," Frank barked. The officers dragged her up the stairs. Her screams faded as the door closed, leaving us in the sudden ringing silence of the basement. The cold wind was still blowing in through the broken window, swirling the snow around us, but it felt cleansing. It felt clean. Frank knelt beside me. "The ambulance is 2 minutes out, Art. You hang in there, you crazy son of a gun. You actually did it." I leaned my head back against the cold metal of the furnace. I looked at the broken window, then down at my leg, then at the knife lying in the corner. Lucas sat back on his heels, wiping sweat and blood from his forehead. He looked at me, and then he reached out and took my hand. He squeezed it hard. "You saved us, Dad," he whispered. "You saved us." I looked at the water heater, at the pipes, at the complex system of the house that kept it functioning. I thought about the woman who had tried to turn it all into a weapon. I reached into my pocket with my good hand. I pulled out a handkerchief stained with oil and sawdust. I pressed it against the graze on my shoulder. I looked at Lucas, and despite the pain, I smiled. "She didn't understand, son," I said, my voice raspy. "Understand what?" I nodded toward the stairs where they had taken her. "She thought she could paint over the cracks," I said. She thought if she looked perfect on the outside, no one would check the foundation. But she was wrong. I took a breath, wincing, as my lungs expanded against my bruised ribs. "A structure with a poor foundation will collapse, Lucas," I said, closing my eyes. "No matter how much expensive paint you slap on the facade, it always falls down in the end." It has been 3 months since the night the basement of the Evanston house almost became our tomb. The seasons have turned. The brutal iron-gray grip of the Chicago winter has finally loosened, replaced by the tentative muddy warmth of early spring. The ice on the lake is breaking up, cracking with sounds that used to remind me of structural failure, but now just sound like nature waking up. Justice, when it finally arrived, was not swift, but it was absolute. The trial was a spectacle, though I only attended the days I was required to testify. Isabella Ricci, or whatever her real name was before she constructed that false identity, sat in the defendant's chair, wearing a modest gray suit, trying to play the victim one last time. She wept for the jury. She spun tales of a difficult childhood, of being misunderstood, of simply trying to manage a husband with a drug problem. But she could not charm the evidence. She could not bat her eyelashes at the forensic accounting that showed millions of dollars siphoned into crypto wallets. She could not explain away the thallium found in her jewelry box, or the spark plug timer in the basement. And she certainly could not silence Dr. Sergei Kavinsky. That was the loose thread that unraveled the whole sweater. As soon as the police offered Kavinsky a plea deal to take the death penalty off the table, he sang. He told them everything. He detailed the prescriptions, the falsified medical records, the kickbacks she paid him from Lucas's accounts. He painted a portrait of a woman who was not just a killer, but a corporate entity of murder, efficient and emotionless. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Isabella was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Kavinsky got 30 years. The judge, a stern woman who had seen her fair share of evil, looked Isabella in the eye and told her that she was a structural hazard to society. I liked that judge. She understood the terminology. Lucas sold the house in Evanston 2 weeks after the verdict. He did not even want to walk through the front door to pack his things. He hired a moving company to retrieve his clothes and his books, and he told them to throw everything else away. The furniture, the curtains, the artwork, it was all tainted. It was all part of the stage set Isabella had built. He said the air inside that house felt heavy, like it was saturated with a poisonous gas that no ventilation system could ever clear. He took a loss on the sale, but he said it was the best money he ever spent. It was the price of demolition. We are a long way from Evanston now. We are about 2 hours north, just across the Wisconsin border, on the edge of a quiet pine-fringed lake. I am sitting on the porch of a cabin that was built in 1974. It is a fixer-upper. The roof was sagging, the deck was rot-infested, and the electrical wiring was a fire hazard waiting to happen. But the bones are good. The foundation is poured concrete, thick and reinforced. The beams are solid oak. It just needed someone to strip away the decay and reinforce the core. It is the perfect project for 3 generations of Vance men. I watch them from my rocking chair. My leg is still stiff. The stab wound healed, but the muscle tissue is scarred and it aches when the rain comes. My shoulder still clicks when I lift my arm too high. But I am mobile. I am functional. Lucas is standing by the railing holding a roll of blueprints. He looks different. The gray pallor is gone, replaced by a tan from working outdoors. He has gained weight muscle mostly, and the tremors in his hands have vanished completely. He is wearing a tool belt and he looks comfortable in it. He is pointing at the roof line, explaining the load distribution of the new solar panels we are installing. And listening to him is Leo, my grandson, the boy who used to hide in his hoodie, the boy who lived on cold ravioli in fear. He is unrecognizable. He has grown 2 inches in 3 months. He is wearing a t-shirt, his arms covered in sawdust. He is holding a tablet controlling the smart home grid he designed for the cabin. He is laughing at something his father said, a loud barking laugh that echoes across the water. He is not looking down at his shoes anymore. He is looking his father in the eye. He is debating the angle of the solar array. Actually, Dad, Leo says, his voice cracking slightly with puberty, but full of confidence. If we angle it at 35 degrees, we get 15% more efficiency in the winter months. I ran the simulation. Lucas looks at the tablet, then at his son. He smiles. A real smile. One that reaches his eyes. You are right, Lucas says. 35 degrees it is. Good catch, Leo. I take a sip of my coffee. It is black hot and free of any additives. It tastes like peace. Lucas walks over to me, wiping his hands on a rag. He sits on the steps of the porch, looking out at the lake. The water is calm, a sheet of glass reflecting the blue sky. How is the leg, Dad? He asks. It is fine, I say. It tells me when it is going to rain. Useful feature. Lucas is quiet for a long moment. He picks up a pine cone and turns it over in his hands. I am sorry, he says softly. We have had this conversation before, but he seems to need to have it again. For what, I ask. For not seeing it, he says. For letting her in. For letting her near Leo. I am an architect, Dad. I am supposed to spot flaws. I am supposed to know when a structure is unsound. But I looked at her and I saw perfection. I was so blind. I lean forward, the rocker creaking beneath me. Lucas, listen to me, I say sternly. You were not blind. You were human. Grief is a heavy load. It creates stress fractures in the mind. When Martha died, you were carrying too much weight. Isabella saw that. She didn't just walk in. She shored you up. She made herself the support beam you thought you needed. That is how the best con artists work. They don't break in. They get invited in because they promise stability. But she almost killed us, he whispers. Almost, I say. But she didn't. And do you know why? He looks at me. Because of you. No, I shake my head. I point at Leo, who is currently wrestling a sheet of plywood into place on the far side of the deck. Because of him, Lucas looks at his son. I spent 40 years inspecting buildings, I say. I have the credentials. I have the experience. But I missed the signs too at first. I thought she was just a gold digger. I didn't see the poison. But Leo did. He saw the cracks before any of us. He felt the vibration in the floorboards. I sit back. You know, in my line of work we have sensors. Accelerometers, strain gauges, tilt meters. They detect the smallest movements, things the human eye can't see. Leo was our sensor. He was quiet, so he heard everything. He was invisible, so he saw everything. He saved your life, Lucas. And mine. Lucas nods, tears glistening in his eyes. He is a good kid. He is a tough kid, I correct him. And he learned a hard lesson early. I look out at the water and let my mind drift to the concept of self-preservation. It is a phrase Isabella used in that basement. She used it to justify her evil. She thought self-preservation meant destroying everyone else, so you could stand on top of the rubble. But she was wrong. Self-preservation is not about attacking others. It is about protecting the core of who you are. It is about recognizing when a situation is toxic and having the courage to seal off the contamination. It is about boundaries. I have learned that we all have an internal alarm system. It is that little voice that says something is wrong here. It is the knot in your stomach when someone smiles too much, but their eyes remain cold. It is the hesitation you feel when a deal sounds too good to be true. For years, I ignored that voice in my personal life. I saved it for work. I thought being polite was more important than being safe. I thought keeping the peace was better than rocking the boat. But sometimes, the boat needs to be rocked. Sometimes, you have to grab a hammer and smash a window to let the fresh air in. Isabella taught me that evil does not always look like a monster. Sometimes, it looks like a charming woman with a casserole and a kind word. Sometimes, it wears a suit and sits at your dinner table. It hides in the blind spots of our love and our loneliness. And the only defense against it is vigilance. Not paranoia, Paranoia is a weakness, a crack in the wall that lets fear in. Vigilance is strength. It is the daily maintenance of the soul. It is checking the locks. It is asking the hard questions. It is trusting the people who have proven they can hold the weight like Leo, and removing the ones who are just dry rot, painted over with gold leaf. We are rebuilding this family. It is going to take time. Lucas is still seeing a therapist to deal with the gaslighting. He has trust issues, and rightfully so. He checks his coffee twice before he drinks it. He double-checks the locks at night. But that is okay. That is just the curing process. The concrete needs time to harden. Leo is studying criminal justice now. He says he wants to be a forensic analyst. He wants to understand how to catch the people who leave no fingerprints. I gave him my old magnifying glass and my inspection kit. He treats them like holy relics. As for me, I am just the foreman now. I am here to make sure the measurements are true and the angles are square. I am here to remind them that a house is only as strong as the love that holds it together. I stand up, my knees popping. I pick up my old metal toolbox. It is dented and scratched, covered in stickers from job sites dating back to 1985. It is heavy, but it feels good in my hand. I walk over to the railing where Lucas and Leo are working. Hey, I call out. That is enough for today. The sun is going down and the temperature is dropping. We don't want the mortar to freeze before it sets. Leo looks up, grinning. We are almost done with this section, Grandpa. It will be there tomorrow, I say. Come on. I made a stew. And I promise I made it myself. No secret ingredients. They both laugh. It is a good sound. A solid sound. I watch them pack up their tools. I look at the cabin standing sturdy against the backdrop of the pines. It is not perfect. It has scars. It has patches where the new wood meets the old. But it is standing. It is warm. It is safe. Family is like a building. It takes years to construct, but only seconds to destroy if you let the wrong elements inside. You have to be the inspector of your own life. You have to walk the perimeter. You have to check the foundation. And when you find a piece of timber that is rotten, no matter how much it costs, no matter how much it hurts, you have to cut it out. You cut it out before it brings the roof down on your head. We survived the collapse. We cleared the rubble. And now we are building something new, something stronger, something that can withstand any storm. I close the latch on my toolbox. Click. The sound is final. The work is done for today. And for the first time in a long time, I am not worried about what tomorrow will bring, because I know that whatever comes, we have the tools to handle it. Thank you so much for listening to our story. It was a journey through the darkest parts of betrayal and the brightest parts of resilience, and I am honored to have shared it with you. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening while driving through the city, relaxing in your living room, or maybe working on a project of your own? Please leave a comment below and tell me your location and your thoughts on Arthur and Leo's fight for survival. I read every single one of them. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, please consider subscribing to the Bittersweet Revenge channel and hitting that like button. It really helps us share these stories with more people. And if you want to support us even further, please smash that hype button to help the video reach a wider audience. Stay safe, trust your gut, and watch your foundations.